Okay, so my friend Norm, it's election season, and it's election season like we've never seen before. There's voter suppression. It's rampant all over. Voter police in Florida are rounding up and arresting people. I mean, there are armed folks in Arizona hanging out on lawn chairs, intimidating other voters. What effect will all of these measures have? And will voters be scared away from the polls?
Michael, thank you for having me back. And I want to send a strong message that voters should not feel frightened, scared, intimidated by these isolated episodes. Don't get me wrong, and we'll talk about this. We're going to get into these Looney Tune costume dress up, unfortunately armed observers who've popped up here and there around drop boxes, but they've been slammed with litigation. The Florida election police have prosecuted some returning citizens, as we put it. These are former felons who've had their rights restored in Florida. There's the first of those cases has just been thrown out by a court. There's major pushback. So if to everybody who's listening, and we know that's a lot of people, it's safe to vote. You won't get in trouble if you vote. There are a lot of people out here who are standing behind the right to vote, and we need you to vote. This election is a referendum on our democracy. Or democracy or Trumpery. Which way are we going to go? And nobody has warned more about the dangers of the second route than my friend Michael Cohen. So everybody needs to turn out for that referendum, irrespective of party. It's not a partisan thing. We need people to vote for democracy.
Yeah, look, we have a real problem, and let's just use Arizona because that's the one that seems to have gotten the most attention, with individuals dressed up in paramilitary gear, holding rifles, AR-15s, and so on. You even have Carrie Lake, who's running for governor, who turns around and says, in advance of the election, she's pulling a Trumpery, as you like to call it. If in fact she loses, she will not concede because clearly the election was stolen. And now you have these folks that are camping out on lawn chairs, and they're, even though this one in Maricopa County, let's say it was 2 people, and that there are dozens of complaints that have been lodged with the police, it's not just only those 2. There's a lot of intimidation going on.
No, that is true. There are episodes around the country, but those are being met with force, Michael. You know, no sooner did these Arizona, let's separate out the different categories. So there's the dress up soldiers in Arizona who popped up here and there. No sooner did they start those shenanigans than my friend, the great election litigator Mark Elias, slapped them with a lawsuit. There's recourse for people when these kinds of things pop up. Now, I'm here just talking in my personal capacity. Just Norm, the citizen and the voter. I'm going to say what I think. The behavior of these election denying candidates, and it's not just one, there's hundreds of them from coast to coast. The behavior of the election denying candidates who say, I'll only recognize the outcome if I win, that's reprehensible. That's why people need to pay attention, and in a nonpartisan way, they need to understand what's on the ballot this season. Democracy versus Trumpery. Again, that's just me, my personal capacity, my personal views.
You know, when I saw this happening with these armed vigilantes outside of the poll booths and trying to intimidate, it reminded me so much of the movie Gangs of New York. Remember that, where Daniel Day-Lewis plays, William the Butcher Cutting, right?
Yeah.
And on behalf of Boss Tweed, they're like, Well, you only voted once. Get back in there and vote again. As they hit him in the head with a slapjack, right? Or, who did you vote for? And then who are you going to vote for? And then he said, well, I'm going to vote for this guy. And they're like, oh, no, he's not. Get him out of here. And so that's what it reminds me of. I mean, this isn't an election. This is a farce. When you have a party and the GOP, they're not making any statements that tell people stop doing this, right? That this isn't good for our democracy. They've been silent as to this entire issue. And that in and of itself should be an indictment upon the party.
Unfortunately, you'll remember that in Gangs of New York, there was the Protestant Confederation of American Natives. That was Bill the Butcher's gang. And then there were the immigrant dead rabbits. Fortunately, the champions of democracy in this cycle are far from dead rabbits. Okay, democracy and its advocates are fighting back in court, in the court of public opinion, by talking about the issues. The press, thankfully, is not treating election denialism as if, the Republicans say Trump didn't win the election, and the Republicans say Trump actually won. The Democrats say Biden won. No, even the press calls it a conspiracy theory, election denial. So we know the American people care about democracy, and I think folks need to get out and vote as if our democracy were on the ballot, because it is, Michael. If the followers of Trump, if his acolytes are able to occupy these election offices, they will represent a threat to our democracy. So folks need to keep that in mind. And again, just me, it's just Norm's personal views. They need to exercise their franchise, irrespective of party.
Could you imagine, how could you not be angered? The fact that something as routine as an election has now gone so off the rails that there are conspiracy theories before the election even takes place. You have activists preventing people from voting the way they want. There's already questions as to the number of mail-in ballots that will or will not be counted because there are new individuals that are in charge of this. It brings me to my next question, Norm. During the 2020 election, it was the courts that saved democracy. This time around, it's kind of like anyone's guess, right? What, if any, measures have been taken to ensure that we have a free and fair election? I mean, are we ready for MAGA shenanigans and we'll call it the Steve Bannon precinct strategy? And then how about election deniers, like I said with Carrie Lake, who lose their races? Are there guardrails in place, if at all, if things go wrong?
We made it through the 2020 election when you had the election denier in chief, the number one election denier in the White House with all the power of the presidency. So I think the same tools and structures that got us through 2020 successfully, as you point out, the courts played a role, but it wasn't only the courts. It was election officials of both parties, even those of Trump's own party who stood up to him. In Georgia, look, he's still furious at Kemp and Raffensperger. And yet the amazing thing, Michael, they both survived their primaries. So that, by and large, this is the first cycle in which the Trump following election deniers have tried to get in. I don't think they're going to be so successful in doing that. And here's why. Let me tell you the guardrails. Number one, there's the Constitution. When people try truly outrageous, like if some some partisan governor wants to recognize one of these election deniers who didn't actually win. The Constitution, the laws, and as you point out, the courts do not allow that. Second, I do think, having lived through 2020, the press is much more vigilant. Michael, when you warned me that Donald Trump would not leave the White House without a fight, as you said, he'd never leave without being forced out. You were one of the first people to get me to focus. This was way before the impeachment. This was in the beginning of 2019. So you were almost 2 years ahead of the curve. And then through the impeachment, I saw the kind of person he was. I reprinted your warning in my book on the impeachment. Now we've been through it once, so people have their guard up. And I think, we're really going to count on the voters. I think the vast majority of Americans reject this election denial idea that Trump actually won in 2020. And the implications of that, if you'll embrace a baseless claim like that in a past election, what might you do in a future election? I think the American people aren't going to like that. So ultimately, yes, the Constitution, the laws, judges, elections officials to do the right thing. And ultimately, the American people are going to have to do the right thing.
That's what we hope. Now, of course, me being more the pessimist than you is the ultimate, optimist here. I see it a little bit different. So I saw, for example, a Politico morning consult poll. And in that poll, it shows a majority of Americans, and this is in support of what you say, support altering the way Congress certifies elections to make it more difficult to override presidential election results. Yeah. Okay.
That's the good news. That's the good news.
Great news. Here's the bad news onto it, right? It's only 52% of the respondents, right, say that they support this legislation. 52% of the 100, so you got 52% there, 22% are opposed to that notion, and 26% are opposed to that notion, and then 22% have no opinion. What? You have no opinion? You have no opinion whether or not that when they call the election, that the system works? That it shouldn't be, the loser shouldn't be capable of trying to overturn an election? I mean, when you have only 53% of the respondents in agreement, that's a real problem. At least it's a problem the way numbers, I see it.
Yes, but I wouldn't overread into one particular poll or into polls generally. On the one particular poll point, Michael, remember that just a few weeks back, we got that NBC News poll when they asked Americans to rank what was the most important issue. You remember the number one issue, democracy.
Number one issue. Well,
depending on how the poll questions are phrased, depending on whether the poll respondents are really listening, what else is going on in the world that day? Do they understand? Do people understand? Maybe some of the people who answered that question thought that it was a pro-Trump question, that we were trying to weaken Trump's ability. So,
Norm, I got to be honest with you, that poll didn't have democracy as number one. It actually had the economy as number one, which is also scary.
The NBC News poll had democracy as the number one issue. Now, yes, most other polls, you're right. The economy has come back into the fore. Gas prices, other economic factors were moderating over the summer. There's some counter trends now. But Michael, we've learned over the years, you can't, these polls can be misleading, right? They can surprise you both directions. I think people should vote as if their democracy depends on it, because it does. So I'm not dissuaded in any way. I hear your realism. It's not pessimism, it's realism. But I think that the American people are capable, certainly, of pushing back on some of the worst. And some of these election deniers will make it through. But some of the worst of them are running way behind, Michael, way behind the Republican Party. So we need to study that data when the election is over. And even if a few make it through here and there, if they underperform, then that will tell us that the American people don't like denialism. If regular Republicans, as was said in the 1-6 hearing, team normal outperform team crazy, that will be sending us an important message, regardless of how Democrats fare overall.
Yeah, well, look, Democrats have to fare well because as a guy who was involved in the impeachment of the former guy, it was the first or the second impeachment? The first, right?
It was the first impeachment.
Yeah, so the first impeachment, that the Republicans, if they take the House and the Senate, we know what's going to happen from day one. They'll file articles of impeachment against both Biden and Kamala on day number one. And the danger that exists now that did not exist for Trump is you could potentially have a majority in the Senate that could convict on this. And this
you would have to get, Michael, you would have to get 2/3 of the Senate.
2/3. I understand.
That's but not happening.
You're probably right. It's probably not going to happen. However, because they might have a majority, there are things that the Republicans will attempt to do, which is my fear, that is out of the norm because that's just how they act. Their sole intention is to obtain power, House and Senate. They will make the last 2 years of Biden's administration into a lame duck administration. We already know because they've said they would do it. They would put a stop to the debt ceiling. They would pass all sorts of regulations. This is scary times.
It is scary times. And we have the power, Michael, you and I and your listeners, we have the power if we vote, if we each, I'm not telling you who to vote for or what party to vote for, but vote. And not only vote, talk to your friends and family about voting. Reach out to the people you know. Sign up for the ways you can amplify your voice. For example, by calling voters, by texting voters. There's a lot of different ways you can support and contribute. There's a lot of different ways that we can wiggle the needle. We have to be realistic about the trends. This is going to be a tough cycle, but at the same time, we need to do what we can to mitigate that risk. And then we need to, whatever it may be, we'll make it as good as we can by participating. And then we'll pick ourselves up, we'll dust ourselves off, and we'll make the best of the situation the morning after. That's what we do as Americans.
Yeah, until we lose our democracy, until we lose our rights. Believe me, I know what it's like when the government tries to put pressure on you to take away your constitutional rights, to turn around and then to imprison you. This is not just going to be for Michael Cohen. It's like what I talk about in Revenge. This isn't only and solely for Michael Cohen. There will be an enemies list a mile long that the GOP, Trump, and his acolytes will go after, and it puts so many people in danger. This is our Constitution. This is our democracy in peril right now, like never before. So if people don't get out and vote, you really don't then have the right to turn around when they take away more rights, like under Roe. You don't have a right to complain. It's the least you can do is just get out and vote.
I think that the example that you offer, the Dobbs case, the abortion case, that's a masterpiece of this creeping ideology. But then, we have We just had the candidate in Pennsylvania, Dr. Oz, say that women's choice should be up to a woman, her doctors, and local politicians. Well, why should local politicians be telling women what choice they should make? That Dobbs case is an excrescence. And that really, to me, that represented this philosophy of Trumpery creeping into the judiciary. So I think it's very important to, it is very important to call it out and to turn it out, turn out the vote. That's what we need to do. I know that's what I'm planning to do. That's what I'm talking to everybody about doing. And, this is the first time that we talk about legal questions and their implications for democracy. This podcast, we're starting with democracy first, Michael. You're sounding the alarm. I think people will respond to that. I hope everybody who's listening will make a plan to vote and make a plan to reach out to others to get them to do the same.
Look, so one of the things obviously we're talking about is all the folks that are wondering how the elections will go, because there are so many variables in this upcoming election, in this midterm elections. Now, since 2016, we've all been saying that polls, at least I've been saying that polls aren't accurate. You may remember my Says Who, because I was right about it. But is that really true? I mean, is there still no way to predict the outcome of elections? And more importantly, Norm, because you are my great prognosticator, do you have any predictions that you'd like to make? Like, what do you think's going to happen between Fetterman and Oz? What do you think's going to happen between Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker? What do you think's going to happen with Carrie Lake?
Fetterman and Oz. I still like Fetterman. It was not a perfect debate for the two of them, the first and only debate. But I really thought Oz stepped in it. Fetterman is working through his health issues. He's ready to serve. He's still on the mend, but he now withstands the rigors of the campaign trail. Oz really stepped in it, and I think we're gonna his abortion line about the role of the local politicians. I mean, I really don't want the local politicians in the bedroom telling me what to do, and I don't think anybody does. So we'll see how it plays out. I think Fetterman still has the upper hand there. The problem is that Oz is such a flawed candidate, but Trump put him there. He was the kingmaker. Pivoting over to Walker and Warnock in Georgia, there's just new reports as we were getting ready to do the podcast about, also on an abortion issue, about Walker, more hypocrisy from Walker relating to abortions. We'll see if those reports are borne out. But I just think another Trump-anointed candidate who is not ready for prime time. It turns out that Reverend Senator Warnock is a good campaigner. He's attuned with the people of Georgia. He's struck a moderate tone that suits him well to that electorate. He's obviously going to get a very strong African-American vote. He's a person of faith. Evangelicals who might go in a different direction normally in Georgia respect and admire him. So, I think that if I had to guess, and you never know, right? There could be a wave one way or the other, but if I had to guess, I'm feeling good about the federal races. Haven't tracked all the state races as closely, but I know, for example, the Arizona races, very, very close in the polls. And we still have some time before Election Day. So let's see how things develop. I think Arizona is probably a little too close. Trends are not strong enough to prognosticate there. But I'm liking Fetterman and Warnock, although both of those are tough races we'll see how my predictions come out.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, the numbers are too close to call. And the fact that they are too close to call is the part that is baffling. It's confounding. And the fact that you have somebody as flawed as Herschel Walker. There is a young lady now claiming that he drove her for an abortion. I mean, talk about being a hypocrite on the single most important issue that has gotten him to where he's at. And again, they're within the margin of error in terms of favorability for Warnock over Walker. This to me just doesn't make any sense. I mean, it really doesn't. And I don't understand. This is the part that I really need your help on. I don't understand how it's possible that the young Gen Z are not out there really active and speaking up and picketing and marching and doing all the things that they could. This affects them. These are certain rights that they were born with, that they had. As we know, Roe is 50 years of stare decisis. And yet now it's different. And if governors start then changing whether or not the state then is permitted to permit abortions and so on, you may have to leave the state. They may then turn around and say you can't be a citizen of the state. You don't even know how far these governors are going to go. So these elections are more than just the Senate. It's our way of life.
There is no question that these are extremely important elections. I think that it's unfortunate, but I think the younger generation, indeed, in American voters in general, are not as motivated in midterms as they are in general elections, right? We got the highest turnout in a century in the 2020 election. People really came out to vote because they understood what was at stake. But Michael, we also don't make it easy for people to vote. Gen Z, we know, has a tougher economic time this next generation. Why not have an election day holiday? In some people even argue for making voting a mandatory legal duty. So there's more we could do, but just letting people have a day off for election day, there's more that we could do. And I think we have an obligation. This is the reason that I went in, dumped my TV and other gigs and worked around the clock for a year on the impeachment. I think we have to model a different kind of model of public service for these young folks. And there are some very inspiring figures from both parties. I mean, I think Liz Cheney has been a tremendous hero. There's been nobody who's been as outspoken as Liz Cheney. But I think we need more like that. And can you blame Gen Z for not being so excited when they look at how few Liz Cheneys and Adam Kinzingers there are who are willing to stand up from within the GOP for democracy. So I think that there are a lot of inputs for Gen Z, but hey, if you're listening, come on out and vote. Your future depends on it. Michael is right. We need you in this. We need you in this cycle. And Michael, if not every single race turns out the way we want it to in 2022, there's always 2024. That is really going to be the battle royale. So we need to get ready to refight whatever battles are necessary in the cycle ahead.
All righty. Well then, Norm, in your opinion again, the move towards authoritarianism in this country is based on what? Right? It's terrible for the economy. It turns politicians into all-powerful beings, and it's just not good for the people. So then what's the draw to it? And what do you think? Will democracy make a comeback here and around the world, or is it going to be a gonzo?
The attraction of authoritarianism is that it provides a set of easy answers to the anxieties of some in our country. So by blaming immigrants, by constantly sowing racial and ethnic division, by attacking the rule of law, by stoking people's emotions, irrespective of the truth, by lying to stimulate the baser emotions of people. Even the big lie that Trump won the election. That authoritarian toolkit is going to be attractive to a certain number of people. I blame the leaders. I don't blame the voters who've been duped. It's a con job appealing to the basest instincts, often of Americans. You know, maybe their factory in the American heartland was shut down. Maybe they have a family member who fell prey to drug addiction, to opioid, the opioid crisis, where these opioids were handed out like Tic Tacs all over the country.
What does that have
totally
to
irresponsible.
Norm, what does that have to do with authoritarianism?
History teaches us that makes you susceptible. Economic and other factors with a populist leader like Trump, it makes you susceptible to authoritarianism. But Michael, that's about that hardcore of Trump supporters is still less than a third, sometimes even less than 30% in poll after poll. So the good news is you've got 70% of America who is rejecting all of that. That's why Trump lost in 2020. And I think that we are going to see them. That's why I think in some of these races we've talked about, Pennsylvania, Georgia, I think you're going to see the Democrats win where they might not ordinarily do it. The more Trump is on the ballot, the less people like it. And then the lessons of history are, ours is a very resilient democracy. We've been challenged before. We've gone through very tough times. We had a civil war in this country. We've come through it. I'm not going to predict the exact timetable, but I'll give you another one of my analyses. I assess that our country is strong enough to withstand this authoritarian wave led by Donald Trump.
Okay, and you know, being the general pessimist that I am, I see real problems here. First of all, I just want to clarify something that you said. He doesn't have 30% of the population. What he has is 58% of the Republican Party, right? And the Republican Party only makes up, let's say, 35% or 38% of the country. So technically, he's really at around 20% of the country, which is why he knows statistically he can't win in a general election. Right? His folks, at least the ones that are honest with him, have given him enough information. But what bothers me, and it bothers
you see,
me
you're
to no
the bigger optimist than I am. You're saying it's only 1 in 5 Americans.
That's correct. But what really angers me, and I know it's going to anger all of my listeners too, is the fact that after the raid on Mar-a-Lago by the FBI to recover stolen documents, including what we now know to be nuclear stolen documents, okay? His popularity amongst Republicans surged. Could somebody explain to me? I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I took no psychology courses. What are these fucking people thinking, Norm? I mean, it's almost like if I tell you, you could knock that building down with your forehead. Why don't you go try? This is insane. The guy steals top secret documents. He's hiding them at Mar-a-Lago, right? And he's asked to give them back. He says they're back. He now jeopardizes another lawyer, this Christina Bobb, who's in tremendous trouble because she signed an affidavit that he told her, no doubt, to sign. And yet, after the raid, his popularity increases. What are they thinking? You know the expression "meshuggah"?
Yes, Meshuggah, crazy. Here's what they're thinking. They are feeling sympathy for someone they once admired. The reason it's gone up is, a number of Republicans have moved away. And Michael, I'll point you to we can point to the polls. There's some polls. We'll reserve the debate whether it's 20, 30, 40. A recent New York Times poll had a little over 40% of voters viewing Trump favorably, but many of those reject these ideologies we're talking about. And what's happened is Trump lost some of them because of his continued crazy behavior, the election denial behavior. But some in the Republican Party who were once loyal to him, when they saw that he was raided, they were willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. Now, I think that has changed, Michael. As the details that the guy was holding our most sensitive intelligence about, according to the press, nuclear issues, about Iran, about China, people are saying, what? As they learn more about the documents that were obtained pursuant to the search warrant at Mar-a-Lago. So I think we've seen a little bit of a retraction or a little bit of a shrinkage there.
I don't know, except we've been seeing this going on now for like 4, 5, 6 years already, and somehow or another, right? It's crazy. Let me ask you this then, Norm. What do you make of the January 6th committee subpoenaing Trump? I mean, how do you think that it'll ultimately play out? Because I know this and you know this, Trump has a way of turning things in his favor, playing the victim, right? And, claiming it's all a hoax, a witch hunt, and so on. Was it wise of the committee to give him a potential platform?
I think on the whole, it was wise of them to subpoena him. I don't believe, Michael, that he would ever dare avail himself of that platform because of the criminal jeopardy that he faces. Trump has 3 basic choices with this subpoena. And the committee, by the way, was right to force him to these choices. I did the same thing when I was part of the decision-making process in the impeachment. We had to decide, do we want to, now in that case, we asked, should we subpoena Trump? Should we simply write him and say you have the opportunity to testify, or should we not take the risk, as you say, of giving him a platform at all? We ultimately decided that you couldn't really face history and face America if you're investigating Trump and you don't give him an opportunity to present. Now, we didn't have time for a subpoena. It was after the Ukraine misconduct. We wrote him, we invited him to come and testify, and he refused. And I think that's basically what he's going to do here. He could accept the subpoena and testify. He could deny the subpoena altogether, like Steve Bannon did. You see what that got him? A jail sentence.
You got Dan Scavino who did the same thing, who's got nothing.
True. It could go either direction. There's a third, but you have Peter Navarro, who is also getting prosecuted. So that would be up to DOJ. If Trump took a very we don't know all the details of what Scavino did and why DOJ decided as it did with him. We know DOJ didn't go after Mark Meadows, but Meadows cooperated. He turned over a bunch of documents, just wouldn't testify. There's a third option for Trump. He can either comply, deny, or he can try the case in court. And I think probably that third option is the most likely, that sooner or later he goes to court. We'll see. The first subpoena compliance deadline on the documents is coming up in early November, with the testimony deadline a week later. I suspect Trump is going to litigate it, because if he defies it, he's at risk of going the Bannon route, prosecution for contempt, and he can't really cooperate. If he cooperates, he'll be implicating himself in very serious federal crimes.
If he cooperates, he'll also lose people from his base, which is what he's more concerned about than anything else right now. So let me ask you this. What else might the January 6th committee do before the end of the year? I mean, they will release their report, but, too late to affect the midterms. What becomes of the committee and their report if we, as Democrats, lose the House? I mean, does Kevin McCarthy just sweep it under the rug and we all pretend like it never happened? Almost like what happened to the Mueller report. Same thing.
I think we're in a somewhat of a different situation this time around, and I'll tell you why. Irrespective of who wins or loses the House, the accountability for the January 6th hearings is going to continue. That'll start in Georgia with the likely criminal prosecution by the Fulton County DA, Fonnie Willis. She said she wants to bring charges, likely, or at least conclude the grand jury before the end of the year. I think that means charges, and likely charges against Trump. The feds are deep into looking at these issues. They've got a very active grand jury, and that's on the democracy attack issues, and that's before you get to other state authorities. I wrote a list of different things that the feds and the states could look at that the January 6th committee, to come to your question, can support in its report and findings that it's going to issue after the election. It should look at the Watergate roadmap, where the grand jury laid out each piece of evidence and how it fit into the puzzle. And it should make sure that all of the over 1,000 witness interviews, over 1 million documents, that they go through that. And in their final report, they leave a trail of crumbs, guideposts. They pave the way for these state authorities, federal and state authorities, to follow through. It's not just criminal prosecution. Under the 14th Amendment, Section 3, I wrote about this in my New York Times op-ed when immediately after the 9th and likely final pre-election hearing. The Constitution says insurrectionists and those who give them aid and comfort are not constitutionally qualified to serve in office. Guess what? That's a pretty good description of Donald Trump. So the January 6th committee could provide information that state regulators could use to keep Trump and other election deniers off the ballot. They could do the same for bar authorities, Michael. There's a lot of lawyers who are involved. This was a coup with, instead of tanks and guns and bullets, it was with statutes and cases and lawyers. So the January 6th committee may have a lot of information that they can put out there about facts proving bar complaints. So there's a lot for them to do in that report, and it really could shape the course of years to come, depending on what they put forward in their final report.
Yeah, except the big problem is the guy who ran the whole thing, who orchestrated the whole thing, who directed it and benefited from it, somehow just manages, like even in the Mueller report, manages to escape, despite the fact, and this I happen to know to be true, he refused to testify, so they gave him questions, right? And he signed them under the penalties of perjury, right? They hit him with interrogatories. And most of those interrogatories are inaccurate. Now, are they out and outright lies? I would deem them to be lies. I think he knew that what he was saying was inaccurate, and he was using other people's information in order to craft the answers, but it's a lie. Did anything happen there? No. Meanwhile, I lied to Congress. You'll see it in my book, Revenge. I put the document in. It's not only did I draft that statement that was made to Congress, but Jared was involved, Ivanka was involved, Jay Sekulow on behalf of Donald was involved, so was Ty Cobb, and so was Abby Lowell. Everybody was CC'd on it and interjected their points on what they wanted. I'm the only one that gets hit with lying to Congress, the 1001 violation. None of these other people. I mean, this entire thing is just going way too slow, and I I implore Merrick Garland to step it up while we still have something to step up.
I don't think anyone will disagree with you on the need.
As long
as
you're
speed.
not disagreeing. All right,
I
so Norm, I got another question for you here.
We got to go fast with these prosecutions.
Right.
Yes, Michael.
So I know that you're a huge supporter of Ukraine, as am I. And with a daily barrage of news that's coming from the region, it's really hard to keep up with the bigger picture. Now, what's really happening, my question to you is, do you have any idea what's really happening there now? Because Russia is doing its best to wipe out their infrastructure, and it's about to be winter. I've been into the Ukraine, going back into the year 2000. I was there, and they're cold winters. Do the Ukrainians have the support that they need? And further, do you worry that if Republicans take the House and or the Senate, that they'll cut aid to Ukraine immediately?
Well, there was a not very good letter this week from non-Republicans, from some progressives, very controversial. They retracted the letter. And so we need to have across the board bipartisan support for Ukraine. I do worry a little bit that there are some ultra conservatives who don't feel sympathetic to Ukraine. You do have the expression of these sympathies of people who say, I don't care about Ukraine on that side of the aisle. I would say that the situation of the Ukrainians is certainly challenging. I've just been to Europe to attend the Ukraine Reconstruction Conference, Michael, in Berlin. So I met with dozens of Ukrainians while I was there, as well as others from all over the world who came, 300 people. I was very honored to be invited. It wasn't that easy to get an invitation.
Yeah, I know. I didn't get an invite.
Well, you can come next time. You can come as
your plus
in
one
my delegation. I was only one. There was no plus. It was just me who was invited, but I did go, and I met with everybody. I think Ukrainians have the most important form of energy, which is the moral energy, the morale, the spirit, the courage. They are going to make it through. They're winning. And I think the West will, it's going to be challenging. I think the West will get them the supplies that they need. I think we need to not only help them to maintain and get them military weapons, I think we actually have to let them start doing some reconstruction. So reconstruction aid has to start flowing. I'm worried about those morale issues, about the backing for Ukraine, more than I am about the wherewithal of the Ukrainians themselves. And not only is that an anxiety in the United States, but in Europe, with these high energy costs coming, you always want to keep an eye on the support. But all of that being said, at this conference, boy, the expressions of support were very strong. So for now, Europe is staying the course. And the U.S. has been terrific.
Well, and we can say that about this administration. So look, Norm, you have heard me, and every one of my listeners have heard me say the same thing, that nothing happens at the Trump organization without the direct knowledge and explicit consent of Donald. Now, the Trump organization's tax fraud case started Monday in Manhattan. And certainly, I have some opinions. I have some pretty strong opinions about that. But it's Alvin Bragg's court right now. And they say that Bragg has the upper hand because Weisselberg, the CFO of the Trump organization.
You know him well.
I sure do. He already pled guilty on several counts and also made a plea deal, which of course only becomes valid if he testifies honestly and truthfully to all the questions asked. But the defense, as I see it, is going to say that Allen went behind the Trump family's back in avoiding paying their taxes on the perks that he received and was not conspiring with the company. What's your take on that, both as a defense and as an answer?
Well, I think the company is very likely going to get tagged in this proceeding, Michael. I think that it's silly to attempt to defend by blaming Weisselberg. We know Weisselberg was constantly talking to Trump. As you say, nothing happens at that company. Now, Trump himself is not a defendant in this case, but as you well know, New York Attorney General Tish James has filed a massive civil case against Trump. It's in effect the corporate death penalty. So I think the likely negative verdict, and it doesn't always move fast. The jury selection was not as brisk as some had hoped in this Trump org tax case where Weisselberg is testifying. But I think it's very likely to be a negative verdict. And then, if Trump loses that civil case, Michael, that means the relief that the AG has asked for and can probably get will be taking away certificates that he needs to do business in New York, putting a monitor in to watch his company, not allowing him to take out real estate loans, to serve on the boards or management of companies. I mean, it's a very tough set of penalties. So the criminal case is going to be bad for the Trump org and therefore for Trump's name. And I think he's going to face some serious penalties on the civil side as well. I can't understand why Alvin Bragg did not indict this case.
Me neither. Neither Trump. Can Mark Pomerantz, neither can Carrie Dunn. But I do have a follow-up question, because we all know that a corporation can be held criminally liable in the same way as an individual can be held criminally liable. They prosecute it the same way and they make determinations the same way. But at the end of the day, you can't send a corporation to prison. It's not like you grab a hold of the corporate black book, right? And then you send it off and you put it in a cell like they did to me for 51 days in solitary, right? That's not possible. So what's the ultimate implication? So they take away his ability to do business in New York? They're going to take his assets here anyway. And you saw what Trump tried to do, which is to open up Trump Organization 2 in Delaware. And again, thank God for Tish James. She is truly the AG that we want. I mean, she realized what he was doing, and she filed an injunction to put a stop to that. But at the end of the day, we're not looking for the Trump Organization to be held criminally liable. We're looking for Donald to take responsibility for everything that he did. How does one ultimately affect the other?
Tish James, I like the Attorney General that we have, and I think Merrick Garland is going to do the right thing. He's certainly been forceful on the Mar-a-Lago documents case, and I think that represents the gravest federal threat. But I share your admiration of Tish James. Michael,
talk to me about Alvin Bragg, though. Norm, talk to me about Alvin Bragg, though.
I'm coming to Alvin Bragg. I have nothing good to say about Alvin Bragg. I mean, how could he not charge Trump? Compare him to Tish James, to Liz Cheney, who's led us on the 1-6 committee, to Fani Willis. That may be the best comparison. She's also a DA, municipal DA. She's in Fulton County, Georgia. She's been investigating the alleged democracy crimes of Trump and his cronies. She moved fast. She started right afterwards. She looks like she's getting her case together. I think she's going to charge Trump. Alvin Bragg compares unfavorably to them all so far. I can't understand why he didn't charge the case, but Michael, he still has a chance to redeem himself. And Tish James really called him out in explaining why she thinks there are crimes here. So I'm disappointed. I've been public about being disappointed, but maybe you'll call me an incorrigible optimist. Until he says the case against Trump is done, I'm hoping he'll still redeem himself. I admit to you, we haven't seen that so far. It's profoundly disappointing, but I got to admire those three women who've led the way.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So let me ask you this then. The Supreme Court has completely lost its legitimacy, but Justice Thomas's latest ploy to protect Lindsey Graham from an order to testify before a Georgia grand jury, in my opinion, it's outrageous. Clarence Thomas is clearly out of control. What does this ruling do to the court's standing? And do you think that the public cares anymore?
Well, I should disclose on the Lindsey Graham matter that I filed an amicus brief in the lower court, in the Court of Appeals. So I should confine myself in commenting on the case. This is one where I have clients to what is in the amicus brief. I will say that there is no basis whatsoever for Lindsey Graham refusing to show up and answer questions. He's trying to use the speech and debate clause of the Constitution, which immunizes him for legislative activity, as a shield against answering any question. And the Supreme Court itself has held over and over again that you can't do that. I will say that folks will remember that in the Mar-a-Lago case, where I also filed an amicus brief, the classified documents, there was some anxiety when Donald Trump appealed to the Supreme Court, and it went no place. The court rejected his effort to reverse the 11th Circuit, which said DOJ is allowed to use the documents, the classified documents that they recovered at Mar-a-Lago with their search warrant. And they can do that even though Judge Cannon had initially enjoined them. The 11th Circuit said that's wrong. They turned the criminal investigation back on, essentially, the greatest federal danger to Donald Trump. So, I think we'll make the legal arguments. We'll see what the court does.
Yeah, the biggest problem, of course, is that you can't get rid of them. That's the problem. I've always hated the concept of someone having a job for life, regardless. Which brings me, Norm, to my final question to you. Because, as I say on all the shows when it's time, the hour goes by very quickly. You and I could kibitz for hours. I've read some things about Justice Samuel Alito that lead me to believe that his religion is his guiding light, which is okay. I'm fine with that. But it's supposed to be the Constitution. And clearly, he has no regard for settled law, as we've seen in the overturning of Roe. But now, with 7 out of 9 justices currently on the court being Catholic, first, should it concern us that there is no religious diversity on the court? And second, what's happened to the separation of church and state?
It's pretty clear, and I wrote about this, Michael. When you look at that Dobbs opinion, it's pretty clear that that's motivated by Justice Alito's religious beliefs. And that's terrible. No one who is on the bench should be letting their personal religious faith influence the choices that they make about the law. The law should be neutral. That should be a place where every American can practice. By the way, his preferencing his own beliefs has effects on the religious practices of others. For example, in Jewish religious practice, abortion is legal And if you have a state that criminalizes abortion, they're interfering. Alito has made it possible for them to interfere with the religious practice of another group of Americans. So you can see that in the opinion. I do think that we've talked about a lot of different threats today. I would describe the thread that unifies the conversation about the political threat of election deniers and the disillusionment of some voters, about the legal threat represented by Donald Trump, but also the legal threats to Donald Trump. And now this question of the threat to one of our most sacred constitutional principles, the separation of church and state. So we're doing a threat assessment. And in response, I will say, I'm not going to lie, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This is a runaway majority, and an illegitimate one on the Supreme Court, because they wouldn't let Obama have a vote on his pick in his last year, because it was his last year. That's Garland, who's now the AG. Then they turned around and Trump when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, Trump in the last months of his presidency was able to appoint who he wanted. So the hypocrisy is just naked. But despite that, we have to be realistic. That's what we're dealing with. I think the time will come when a Democratic Senate has a chance to do something about this. When these 9 justices were established in the 19th century, there were 9 judicial circuits. There are 13 judicial circuits now. I think the solution is that we need to have more justices on the Supreme Court. And we can't have, if the Supreme Court is going to be legislating, then we need to liberalize the limitations like the filibuster on the functioning of the Senate, so at least the Senate can address some of the issues that the Supreme Court is raising. By example, passing a nationwide protection as a statutory matter of the right to choice. So I think we're going to have to make some reforms. And in response to all these threats you identify, I'll leave you and the listeners with one last thought. When I worked in the White House, Rahm Emanuel, the chief of staff, used to say, never let a good crisis go to waste. And I think we need to be honest about this very challenging moment we're in. We need to vote with hope, with optimism. We need to vote as if our votes and that of our friends and family we talk to will make all the difference, because they can. Then we'll see where we are. I'll come back on with you. We'll assess the situation. We'll assess the situation, Michael, and then we'll make a plan, because that's what we do, even through the tough times. That's really one of the essential meanings of America. We keep going, and that's just what we're going to do on November 9th. The threats are real. But the power of the American idea, and I think American voters, is real as well. And I hope that they and all your listeners turn out. Whoever you vote for, get out there and vote.
Right, and I say vote blue. Norm, you're the greatest. Thank you so much, my friend. Always good to see you, and always good to have you back here on Mea Culpa.